Welcome, everyone. This is Joe Langton, your host of Automating Success. Today, I have Nick Hegeman on the show, and Nick and we share certain things in common. We are in the service space. We use automatic equipment in the service space, and we believe the best way forward with any sort of automation is for the provider to actually put the automation, the thing that helps them in service, into their complete package. Now, that said, I'm going to give Nick an opportunity to explain what I mean by that. So, Nick, go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience.
Thanks, Joe. Excited to be here. As you said, Nick Hegeman, CEO and co-founder at PaintJet, where we are automating the industrial painting process. We're a little bit different from a lot of robotics companies. And when I say that, we are a vertically integrated solutions provider. So for us, that means it's PaintJet paint applied by PaintJet robots, operated by PaintJet operators, and a long-term warranty, maintenance and repaint cycle, all managed with PaintJet imaging and AI. And how we've been built and structured really from the get-go is all about how do you effectively deploy technology in the field. And I think that's one of the kind of key differentiators between us and a lot of robotic solutions providers, especially as it relates to the construction space. As I'm sure you're familiar with, what typically happens is you'll have a lot of really smart people work on a technology, and the intent is to create a fully autonomous version that will help solve everyone's problems. And they'll raise some money, they'll get there, they'll come up with some really cool stuff, but it doesn't quite get to full automation. And after a few years of going through this cycle, it's just not quite ready for customers to adopt because they're expecting it to do everything for them and don't really understand how to fundamentally incorporate into their business, which will fundamentally change how they operate. And so what ends up happening is that commercial traction never actually meets expectations, and the company ends up going under. Understanding that, and also for our background being in the painting space, for example, I owned a CertaPro Painters franchise several years ago, so can talk specifically about all the 1,001 ways that things can go wrong on a project, and also understand all of the different things that the robot needs to be able to do. And so we're able to use the technology in a very tactical way to deliver a better experience for our customers and for our production crews in a way that makes meaningful difference in our business.
So this is why I was so excited to have you on the show, because sometimes there's just people that get it, and then there's people that try to get it, right? And you get it. Everything you're talking about is exactly what's been slowing down automation in our space, and there's one of the things that I think is crazy is you mentioned that startup, they raise money, they get started. Unfortunately, in my space, what's happening now is you have all these tech startups, and it's causing paralysis by analysis for end users, because they're like, oh, I'm gonna wait for that. They want to try this. At the end of the day, none of them have it completely figured out. And when you tie this type of automation right to the end user, you can build software around things much quicker because you have a constant feedback loop, right? Would you agree to that? And is this another reason why you are doing what you're doing? So explain the process to me, right? And like for me, to introduce myself a little bit, like what's made our company so successful is the fact that we understand why it's solving a problem for us, and it's allowing us to embrace the learning curve of automation, because we know if we embrace that curve, the future will be brighter, right? So tell me what you learned from your past experience to make you say, hey, there is an opportunity in the space.
So for us, and this was really, so just like every other trade, painting is no different. We're going through a massive labor shortage, and the labor supply affects every single thing that you do. It's not a challenge to book work. Although we freak out about it every single spring that we don't have enough. And then like a month later, and it's, oh crap, how do we fulfill all of these orders? And for us, it came to a head. We're painting a 150,000 square foot warehouse. I'd let go of the crew in the middle of it because sometimes that just happens. And it ended up being myself, my family, painting this warehouse to meet customer deadline. And there's a part of it where it's like, if I ever do this again, I'm getting divorced and I don't want to get divorced. I'm an engineer. There's got to be a technical solution for this. And that's really where PaintJet came from. And for us, it was really about finding these specific areas that robotics can fit. Right. So it's like, are you going to come in and it is going to paint every single aspect of trim on a multi-story house and transport up and down staircases and narrow halls? No, it's not really that great. There's a lot of things that it's got to move it around. Where you think there is a good application is large, relatively uniform flat surfaces. So like big box retail, warehouses, those type of things. And that was really the first entry point for us is what are the applications where over 50% of the surface area can be painted with relatively the current robotic technology that's available. And then the trick is, okay, it's out there. How do you modify it or customize it specifically for your use case? And then the last piece, and this is actually probably the hardest piece, is how do you optimize how you use that technology within your business process and within your contract fulfillment process? And it's one of the challenges that the larger a business you have, the more difficult, the larger the business you have, likely the more successful you are, which means you're actually one of the few people that can afford to make this capital expenditure. However, because you have this large organization that you need to fundamentally change to take advantage of the technology, it's also going to be the most difficult for you to use in your business. And so based on that, when we looked at it, it's like, okay, so all the people that could afford to buy this, they're not going to because they're not going to get anything out of it. Because there's also at a certain size in construction, it's once you get over a certain threshold, there's only so many people that can financially play in your space. So it's actually, there's less competition than you would think. And so in essence, there's all of you have more work than you can handle. Your customers aren't asking to use robots. They just want their building built or paint, in our instance, painted. And so the only one who's really needs to take any initiative would be you as the business owner, but there's really no reason for you to do it. And so when we started looking at it that way, it became very clear that selling directly to business owners that very well could take advantage of the technology just wasn't a viable option for us.
Well, and so I want to add something. So business owners would probably be all over it. The issue is their operational team sabotages it. Their actual middle. So what I'm finding is even when I was trying to help other landscapers do this, and there still are a few other landscapers that I've helped just because they're friends, you know, in the space. But the majority of them do it, and they're like, "Man, I don't know why you love these so much. My people hate it." I'm like, because it forces them to, in my space, change routes. It forces them to actually dive in and figure out their fully burdened labor rate and how much money they were spending doing it the old way versus the new way. It scheduling becomes difficult for them. And I think that that's something that you probably already see and have experienced. Would you agree with that?
I would definitely agree with that. I was also add to that because of what the robot can do, it also fundamentally changes who the best people in your organization are, right? For us, the guy that could spray 500 square feet an hour of texture for 10 hours a day and just crush it every single day. Well, and that was vital to your organization. Well, that's not as important as being able to schedule and manage the customer and manage the crew. So it changes the skill set that is required in your business. And from what I've seen, if you're not building the business with that structure already in mind, you're going to go through all types of headwinds internally with having to make those, what essentially rebuilding the business.
Nick, I'm so glad you brought that up because that's so accurate and true. You know, we had to make a transition to have people that were actually analytical and could just, for us, uh, look at how many resets are needed and where resets are needed and why they are, and look at a map and see where they get stuck and fix the holes. And that's turning into our most important person versus the person that could just go and mow 70 acres a week sitting on zero turn, right? So for you now, to expand off what you just said, you said 50, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you said 50% of paint surface can get done with your current automation. So then that means to me also, you probably need people that are more detail, or you need the detail right now to pick up what the machine needs to do.
Correct. So we're doing big warehouses. Well, you got things like bollards, rails, gutters, those type of things that are never going to be, or at least from what I'm seeing, very difficult to paint with robotics. And so it's like those are the type of things that they need to be able to do. The other piece too is that what we're seeing is we're actually seeing it extend careers. And when I say that, it's because painting is manual, and it was all right, the guy that he can do 500 square feet an hour, 10 hours a day, eventually the body starts breaking down and you just can't move as fast as you used to. And whereas in the past, it'd be like, okay, you can't use Bobby anymore. It's hey, you can still move as fast as you used to. In fact, now you can move faster. The difference is you get to bring all that experience that you built up over the past 30 years and apply it to how to optimally run this project. And so it's a way that not only we're extending their jobs within our own business, but it's also being a painter in our company is also just a much better painting job.
I love it. So not to get too focused on like where we're at, because obviously it's talk, so we've got to try to paint a picture, no pun intended, of how your system works, right? So explain to me how you set one of these up and how it can actually do this, just in a general kind of lay it from start to finish.
Yeah. So, and I think that's one of the kind of the key things to us. So we're not using 6 or 7 degrees of freedom robotic arms. It's not like what you see on paint assembly lines. And so we have a gantry robot, and essentially it is a scaled down CNC machine that then hooks onto the side of a boom lift basket or a cherry picker, whatever you may call it. And then it plugs into the back of that. And then we're able to remotely control from the ground the placement and movement of the cherry picker, and then also the activation of our paint system. And so essentially what it turns into is, instead of 8 guys, 2 to 3 lifts all over the place, it's a team of 2 to 3. Everyone's on the ground. You got a couple safety spotters, someone watching materials, and then the actual lift operator themselves, which is also safely on the ground 50 feet away from the lift, so they can see where everything is and it's not a safety issue. And then they're just painting by boxes, so 50 square foot boxes, and you'll just go just down, over, up, and you'll just repeat that thousands of times across the surface of the building. And
so
then
insurance
after that, you go in
companies
and do the retail work.
Insurance companies must love you. Taking people out of those.
Right. And so that's also, we've been fortunate with some of our strategic partnerships. Like, for example, one of our partners is Intact, and they focus on specialty insurance, and they really understand how robotics is reducing risk. Whereas a lot of your mainstream companies don't really understand robotics. And because it's something they don't understand, it's something that inherently increases risk in the job site. And so partnering with those right type of entities that understand, no, we're removing the number of people in dangerous positions. And then we're removing them from heights, and we're getting them out of these caustic spray environments. And we are reducing the wear and tear on their bodies, just with reducing the amount of repetitive arm movements. All those things are seen as a positive.
Yeah. So first of all, I want to repeat that insurance company name for me, because
Intact.
Okay, so
Intact. They're actually an insurance company based out of Canada, but they've got a specialty insurance arm in the U.S. and they're really, really good at knowing and understanding how you use and operate robotics in uncontrolled environments like construction.
Yeah. I asked for that because it's kind of funny to me. That is a big problem in any industry, yours, mine, is the insurance companies don't understand it. And what happens is it's actually slowing down how some companies can scale this out. Because
Absolutely.
at first you fly under the radar. They're like, yeah, okay, you got one robot, who cares? Then you have a few hundred robots, and they're like, wait. And then I just had this conversation with my insurance company. We got to sit down and have a talk. And it's like, why? Like, we've never even not had one claim with my robot. You should be like ecstatic. But so that this is good to know those are out there. That'll be a huge benefit to my listeners. So did you have any kickback? I mean, sounds like you started your company with the automation. So likely you're not experiencing any kickback or lashback from your people, because if they work with you, they know that's what they're doing. I assume you want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, there's a couple pieces to that. Number one, and just like everyone, we have more work than we can handle. So it's not like no one's losing their job over this, because there's this giant ever growing backlog anyways. And that's kind of what the people that we're hiring, it's really targeting those that are kind of tired of the traditional way that we've been painting the past 50 years. Like if you truly look at it, airless sprayers came out in the 60s, and we pretty much have painting structures the exact same way since then. Like nothing truly groundbreaking has happened. And with all of the fragmentation and all the different decision makers and all the different stakeholders, and it ends up being the most expensive solution, the most expensive and lowest quality and most lengthy solution. And I think the people that work for us explicitly want to do that differently. And so we're very attractive to for those individuals. One of the things too that we've been surprised by the reception is from unions specifically. Is unions, they are proactively reaching out in terms of how they can partner with us, because they're viewing it kind of similarly. It's an opportunity to maintain their competitiveness, even if you're in an environment where you have both union and non-union in workplaces. They view it as an ability for their people to be competitive, and then it's also, as I said earlier, a way for them to extend their members' work careers. And so I would say, more than anything, it's just, if you work with us, it's kind of by definition you're already on board.
Well, I think it's interesting. I was going to ask the union question, but it doesn't surprise me what you said. I mean, you now are going to know this about me, but I was a union electrician for 11 years. And a lot of times people assume it's all about just keeping labor, but it's a lot of times unions are all about the training. What training can they provide their workforce that other people are not exposed to? So this does seem something that they would get behind and say, hey, let's train the people how to use that automation. And believe it or not, I have automatic mowers at my own old electrical union hall, because they saw the value in the fact that electricians install the outlets that my stuff plugs into. So it's kind of a cool story, is that people will see, and I'm always amazed how much the public perception will see that and be like, hey, killing jobs. And I always say, you are just not someone hiring people. If you hired people, you would realize there's no job to be killed, because what's usually preventing companies from scaling and growing market share is the inability to find people that can pass drug tests, show up to work, and work in a safe manner, right?
The safety piece, I think, is a big component that I think a lot of companies in the population at general just kind of gives, say, lip service to. It's like, yeah, fundamentally, like, that makes sense, and that's what needs to happen. But I think in construction, it's real. Whereas if you're, I pose this question to a lot of people, and there's why are people leaving the trades? And it's like, well, would you want to be in 95-degree heat with 80% humidity for 10 hours a day for the next 30 years, waving your arm in this exact motion? Like, no, probably not. So I don't think that's an unreasonable request or unreasonable understanding that we should not want to subject our employees to that type of environment. And so when you look at unions too, I mean, it's also just a better, safer job.
Yeah, no, totally. And yeah, no, I mean, I think it's fantastic they're embracing that. I think that'll really help you go. And then if the unions embrace it, and then you can have them train that workforce, there should be nothing preventing you from scaling in other states. Like, what states are you operating currently in right
So we got our start by specifically kind of to your point. It's like, listen, we'll we have a smaller mobile workforce and a tool that can help us paint things faster. And so we move that tool. That tool's mobile, that comes with our workforce, and we'll go to all the areas that, right? Because a lot of these companies have had relationships with a contract for 20, 30 years. And our approach is like, listen, we're not looking to mess up that relationship. We just want to be your first call if they don't want to go somewhere. And so what that means is we end up going to all the places in the middle of nowhere that no one wants to travel. So we're actually all over the Midwest. We go from Washington to Pennsylvania, North Dakota to Texas, and most places in between.
now? So essentially, now tell me if I'm wrong in this mindset, because with what you have and you're so focused on that 50% of what your system can do, essentially you could just be a subcontractor to all these contractors. And is that maybe what you're already doing?
So it's because we still have a long way to go in the overall maturation of the technology. But that's primarily how we've been operating as a subcontractor to general contractors. But as the technology develops, for us to be a subcontractor to other players or other established players in the process, where we would come up and just do like the one or two surfaces that we're good at painting, and then we own that specific, and then you can go back and do the rest of your business and you own the relationship. For that to be a possible future, I think is totally plausible.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so to me, that's kind of how I started this. I did it with my own company first, then realized once I had all the metrics to scale it, know how much it cost me to maintain the robots, how many resets a robot has, then I introduced a service model that just can go to any contractor. They don't have to worry about coming up with the capital, and that's just what we specialize in. So I can totally see you doing that. So talk to me about, I mean, obviously there's all sorts of projects. You said big box retail is kind of the big one. And I know in my research, I see that you've covered 1.5 million square feet in the past 3 years, right? Which that's a lot of square footage. But what's probably what would one of your favorite projects being the person behind the scenes here that you've done?
I don't know if I can say, because a lot of our customers are under confidential. They all have like code names on the projects, but we'll just say it's a very large, well-known retailer. I think was like the first one of those that we did, was really exciting, and has, I think for us within the contractor tilt up community, that one really gave us license to get all of these other projects. So I think that first one there with that big name brand, and it was really large. That one was a fun one, because it was the first time when it's, hey, we can go head to head with people who've been doing this for 20 years and focus in this space, and we can actually outperform them in the field, which isn't a small challenge. I mean, if you look at robotic companies across the board, to say every single one of them, the biggest challenge is how do you take it from the lab to the field. And when we cross that bridge, like that's a big deal, because that's often the piece that trips everyone else up. And so if you're going to say, hey, what's your favorite project, that is definitely top of the list.
So can you only do inside painting, or can you also paint outside?
The robot exclusively focuses on outsides.
Oh, it's outsides you're focused on.
Outsides is what we do. We also think that technically that is the most challenging. We do have competitors that are working on insides with robotic arms. There's challenges with robotic arms in general. Outside is a whole different ballgame. You need to use a special vision system. And then the real big question is, how do you place your system at that height? Because it's not a challenge to apply the paint. It's how do you control, place, and manipulate the application of that apparatus. And that's really where all of our engineering focus is. So that's where we believe we have a unique advantage. The other piece too is outside is where the real, we'll say, valuable painting is done. And I don't mean that from a cost standpoint, but in terms of it requiring it to be applied to the mill from a quality control standpoint. So if you're on the inside of an office, the painting's not done perfectly. Okay, it's a little annoying. Go touch it up. Nothing bad's gonna happen. But if you're on this outside of the warehouse and your paint falls off, and now water's seeping into your CMU block or the underlying concrete, and then it's leaking through to the other side, and then next thing you know, the entire surface is bubbling up. That's bad. Similarly, you look at you're on a large shipping container, right? And you've got these welds that are being protected by the paint, and the paint comes off, and then the salt water is abrasive to that weld, and then your welds are breaking. Well, then you're leaking into the ship. That's bad. If you're on a chemical storage tank and the paint starts coming off, well, now you're looking at either that paint's going off and into hundreds of thousands of gallons of an expensive chemical, or even worse, that expensive chemical is now leaking out into the environment. And so exteriors are where A, you have a lot of large uniform structures, but B, also where the things that the robot is good at in terms of applying to the mill over and over and over is that much more important. And so those are the areas where we try to play, is where we have an unfair advantage due to our technology.
So when you used to do it the old way and you would do a takeoff for how much paint you need, if you have a percentage of product saving now when you're doing it automated?
We've seen documented savings of 25-30%.
Oh my God, I was looking 30% just because that's what I save in my space, but not in it's more of a savings in labor. So I figured with you have two things going for you. You have a labor equivalent and a product equivalent.
We really do. And it's especially in outdoor high performance areas. I mean, this isn't $20 a gallon throw on an interior new build. I mean, this is $100-$200 a gallon multi-component epoxies. Like, these are, if the spec is 4 mils and you're applying it at 5, which, like, humans aren't great at deciphering between 4 and 5 mils.
Yeah.
There's 25%. And if you're going to be budgeting, 100-200 grand in paint, and you can save 25-30%, that's real.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. So first I have to say, for some reason I kept envisioning you were painting the inside. I'm glad I asked if you were doing inside or outside, because in my mind from my electrical days, like, that's what I was thinking. You were painting all the bottom pans and doing all that stuff, so it's actually quite impressive to know you're doing the outside work. That's really something. So, from the time you realize, okay, there's a need here, I have to do this. How long did it take you with, you said you had an engineering background, to actually realize there was a need and get something that did the work?
So with us, and I think that's another thing that we've been very intentional about, is what can we do today? It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to get a result today. And with our very first version, because I was still running my CertaPro franchise at the time, and I was pretty inundated with that, and we were just starting up, so I didn't have a lot of time. And I actually just did a partnership with Purdue University. I sponsored one of their senior design courses, and it was basically, all right, come up with something. Here's what we're just paint this big area. I don't know how, but just come up with something. And through that was 3 or 4 undergrads, and then I would check in with them every week. And we had something that was plausible in one semester. The next semester, we turned it into a prototype and actually started painting with it a little bit. And then that summer, I made the investment, and we had an intern from Vanderbilt. She bolted it together and brought some electrical components to it. And that actually worked. That was the first one worked. We did a side by side, very, we'll say semi manual. We were still in the lift, and it worked. So I would say, and these are also undergrads that have, this would be one out of 5 or 6 different courses, and it's their last semester too. So not super focused on this. We'll just put it that way.
Yeah.
Um, about a year, but now with our team now, we're doing complete system overhauls in 3 to 4 months. Like we just released PaintJet Bravo in, I think it was June or July. And then we're going to be just over 6 months. We're going to be releasing Charlie, and it's a total system overhaul. Um, and we're going to be releasing that end of March, is when we'll be shipping it, and it'll be on sites in April. So, I mean, if you get the right team, you can start churning out stuff relatively quickly. And I think that's been a key to us, is our focus on what can we get out into the field now, and not being forward to our engineering team, is one of the reasons why we're iterating so quickly.
So how many systems do you have out in the field?
Right now we got 3, and we'll be bringing 2 more with Charlie, and then with Charlie, that will be likely, we'll be really ramping up.
So how many people, I mean, do you have any partners? You want to talk about their backgrounds? Like, where, your team, maybe tell me a little about your team that you've assembled.
Yeah, so our team's really great. We've got now 25 full-time staff. I think one of the things we're intentional about is that 50-50 split between in the field construction painting experience and robotics experience right now. So you look at myself, I'm kind of straddled both at a high level. But then you're looking at our COO. He's experienced, opened up shipyards on the East Coast. You look at our co-founder and our VP of National Accounts. He's been up and down the entire coatings ecosystem, whether it's a contractor himself, working with manufacturers as a manufacturer's rep. He was actually, him and I, we met when we were at CertaPro, and then actually jumped on part of PaintZen as well. So experience throughout the entire value chain. Also bringing in our VP of growth, experience working with prop tech startups that have scaled pretty rapidly. And then you jump over to but they're really focusing on the in the built world. And then you jump over to our CTO, previously working on advanced vision systems, and then with an experience of managing teams in both the US and Asia. So really unique skill sets and backgrounds of everyone we've brought into the company. And I think that's one of our competitive advantages, because if you just looked at the breadth of experience and specifically tactically being able to deliver in your core area, that's been really unique for us, and one of the reasons why we've been able to deliver.
One of the questions I always like to ask, because it's becoming a bigger and bigger question for people trying to get into the space. So obviously you've got some really high level talent, and obviously it costs money to make this. So, could you maybe talk a little bit how you obtain the capital to even get this idea off the ground? Because that's something nobody ever likes to talk about, but it's probably the biggest piece of the puzzle.
It is a really big challenge, especially in this environment. And so I think Especially now. I mean, we have partners that in the past were all about like they were you would think the leaders of construction technology. You think Contech and prop tech, and hey, this is the place where robots, to your point, deliver the most value. And given the environment now, they're taking a step back and saying, hey, we don't touch hardware anymore, because it's so challenging. And it's those that want to do it, you have to be able. So, number one, understand that if you're going to be successful, you're signing up for a harder journey. You just are. Like, it's scaling. So, selling the robot for the most, there are other cases. There's some really interesting companies, like Dusty Robotics and Floor Layout. They are having success selling and leasing the robot, but for the most part in construction, just given all the variety of things you run into, the only way you're going to be successful is if you own the entire service and own the entire process. And so that means your team, because that's what the early checks are really, they're not about your product, because everyone's early stage project is basically trash. It's really about the team. And so your team, you have to have tactical experience, and it can't be like you have an advisor. This has to be a co-founder. One of your core 2 to 3 people starting the company have to have experience in industry so they can speak to customers, not only customers, but they can also speak to engineering about here's all the one-off things that are going to totally screw this up. And then the other piece is you have to have a really strong technology partner that they understand how to introduce a product into a highly variable environment. And that's challenging. But if you have those 2 things, you understand that you're signing up for just a harder journey, then I think you've got a shot. And the other thing too is that I will say this, and we went through this with ourselves, because when we started off, we're like, hey, we're going to use this as a cost of goods advantage, and we're going to take market share, and that's how we're going to grow. And all of the traditional things that apply that inhibit growth and inhibit scale within a service company won't necessarily apply to us in the same way, because we have technology that solves all of those. That initially came back on deaf ears, and we got a lot of pushback. And it was like, okay, well, maybe we should sell the technology. And then we went through 3 to 6 months of all of the things that you and I just talked about. And it's like, okay, that's not going to work. No one's giving us money anyways. So we might as well at least do what's best for the business. And we went back to our original vision. And when we went all in on that, and it had I will say the confidence, it's like, listen, this is it. This is what we're going to be about. We can grow this way with this model. And if you're on board with that, we'd love to work with you. That's when things really started to work for us. So I would say it's having the right team and the right composition of the team, understanding that it's going to be tough to scale. Like, there's a lot of components that we're going through right now that are just most software companies don't have to deal with. Like it's just, you look at our financial statement and it's, hey, we have 150, 250 line items. A SaaS company is going to have 20. We have to have an operations department, right? It's because we have to deploy all of these things and manage them. That may not be the case for a lot of software companies. And so just understanding that what you're doing is going to be inherently more difficult, and then embracing it, owning it, and going all in on that, and understanding and being, I would say, almost fanatical about where that trajectory is long term. Because that's really what everyone's buying into, is what's this going to look like 10 years down the line.
Yeah, it's always interesting because investors, they can't really compare what you or I are doing to software as a service, because you openly said there's so much more into it. But then on the flip side, they can't compare it to a normal service model where they just look at your EBITDA and say, this is where you're at, because all those traditional metrics don't necessarily exist, because you have a machine that has completely cloned a process that consistently keeps paying for itself over and over again, without any retraining, without any sick time and vacation time. So that's my thing. Like, for me, I took a different route, because I was able to show a bank, okay, listen, I'm just buying equipment. And at first I kind of didn't tell them I'm getting equipment without a person on it. I just started buying the equipment. And the one thing I did was I separated out, I made a little separate P&L at my landscape company, just looking at those accounts. And then how I had to do it was I had to show the banks, listen, when you separate this out, I'm running 33% profit versus when I do it with people, I'm 6% profit, which is a traditional landscape company runs on 5 to 7% profit when you're doing 10 million and more, right? So it was kind of crazy because then when the banks started seeing that, they're like, okay, how many more do you want to buy? But I had that few years where I had to separate that out and just totally grind and struggle for them to see it.
And that's what you're going to have to do. And it's also one of the things, especially in this environment, because I think traditionally in venture, like if it doesn't work out, okay, like, hey, we made our bet. We're expecting a decent amount of these. We're not going to see any money back. And we'll just focus on the ones that do, given the fact that you can always turn revenue. There is an extra availability from an off ramp, or it's just in a downside protection scenario, because you've got private equity dollars out there that will do exactly what you just talked about and will support that. But you've got to be at a certain size, and you've got to have the data to show that. And I think in this environment, I mean, you have venture funds that are seeing a 75%. Now, this isn't across the board, but some are seeing 75% reduction of their entire portfolio. And so it's like, hey, maybe if we didn't have a complete write-off of some of these, we'd be interested in models that maybe have a different outcome. And so I think that's the other thing too, is acknowledging, hey, we have this exponential outcome right here. This is everything that we're going into, but there is another way for everyone to get their money back and everyone to be made at least somewhat whole.
Yeah, I mean, fortunately for me, I was my own venture capital, right? Is what ended up happening, and I was fortunate enough to have a company that was large enough to do that. And you brought up the size. I mean, in our space, and it's interesting, you know, same thing for you, because we have so many parallels. So I'm interested to see if there's a parallel here. But you know, PE, they're not interested until you're 50 million or more usually with this stuff. Anything under than that, they're not intrigued. But you know, it shows there is a massive opportunity once you get there. There's going to be so many people that want to get in that are going to need that startup. And this is where you fall back into that subcontractor model. Instead of funding them and letting them become competition, then if you can get to that size, that's where you basically say to the PE, okay, listen, we can control the market. We're just going to focus on what we do. That's my way. I don't know if that's going to work out in your market, you know, but.
So, well, there's another piece to this, and this gets what us is. There's also a difference in terms of, so I think number one is when you're looking at your funding partner, making sure they are 100% aligned with what you're doing. I've seen other robotics companies where it kind of started off that way, and then eventually their partners, there's a misalignment, and then they switched to focus on. And they were pushed to change their business model to rent or lease the widget, and it didn't work. And so that's one of the things we have been incredibly focused on, making sure that the people who we work with are aligned with what we're doing and the way we're going about our business. So that is to a point where it's like, hey, we've had really good partners be interested, and then we get to, hey, what do you think about changing your business model? It's like, I understand, I hear you. I understand the benefits of it, but it doesn't work. In this industry right now, it doesn't work. And this is the direction that we're going. And we understand if that doesn't work with your model, we're just not going to be able to work together, and that's okay. But being able to have those type of conversations and really truly believe in the way that you're going about the business is very valuable. But what you were talking about too is that with private equity, it also changes your ability to reinvest in the technology piece. And that's where what I see with what we're doing is reinvesting in technology to what's the next industry that we can break into? What's the next vertical that we can own? What's the next robotic suite of robotic and software and AI products that can disrupt the next trade, that is always something that's going to be core to us. And understanding that if you do start looking at the private equity piece, that may not be something you are afforded to do, right? Because it becomes about EBITDA, and reinvesting into R&D is going to inherently decrease EBITDA. Right?
Yes.
And so it just gets back to being super aligned with your partners.
Yeah. No, and that's one thing to just say to the audience that is different for you and I, is because I don't make any of my own equipment. I actually just find the best manufacturers in the space and I use their equipment. It's a little different. Like for the people listening before the show, we talk and then we come on the show. But in my space, manufacturers were trying to enter the space and couldn't. So I was able to take advantage of their stuff they already made and show them the way in. Whereas you actually made the product and realize if I make it, I can't put it in the hands of other people because they're going to inherently mess this up, right? So I do believe it is a totally different thing. And then I also wonder, I just went on a little bit of a rant, but I also wonder, since you were in a franchise before, have you thought about somehow with your technology, just training franchisees and taking what you're doing and becoming a franchisor?
So explicitly, no, we're not going to do that. But I think there are some interesting concepts from a franchise model that I think can help support our growth. And it's probably not a franchise, but there may be licensing partnerships with trained operators that we can facilitate the fulfillment of our contracts, that I think could be an option in the future.
So I told you when we started the show, I was going to take some time to learn about you, and I realized we're 55 minutes in and we just talked about the business the whole time. So before I transition and to learn a little more about you before we end the show, is there anything I didn't cover that you want to get out for anybody that's going to listen and you're going to share this podcast too, about what you're doing and what you're excited for in the future?
I would guess, kind of going back to those that are thinking about getting into the space, and we need this across all of the trades. And I think you're going to start seeing this over the next 5-ish years, that those that do embrace automation in their trades, there is going to be an incredible amount for consolidation and growth within that entire vertical. You just are. It's especially as people are looking to retire and their family may or may not want to be involved with the business. Well, they have all these customers that continuously need to be taken care of, and what's the right off ramp for those customers and their employees? And if you have this technology that gives you a strategic advantage in the marketplace, it ends up being a home for everyone. And so, given those steps that we need to take to keep up with this demand, I think that is going to be when you're looking at, hey, who are the early adopters and early winners and the early champions of technology in the construction space. I think what you're going to see is those are going to be end up being the larger dominant players in the overall construction market. And I'm just excited to see how that evolves over the next 5-10 years.
Yeah, Nick, I couldn't agree more. And for anybody questioning your insight on that, you can take a look at Europe, just go across the pond, as they say. And there are not so many of these small little independently owned shops. There's bigger corporations. They've been in business longer and they've already witnessed this cycle of, not entrepreneurs are such a small percentage of the population. Everybody assumes their kids are going to want to be in business, and a lot of kids don't want the stress of that. So I do agree with your consolidation and like conglomeration type idea. I'm seeing that in the landscaping space also, and you can really see a lot of predictors looking into European market. And I do think that the companies that embrace technology early on are the ones that are going to be able to handle the continuing labor shortage that's just going to continue to get worse and worse in the future. So I think that's perfectly said. I think it can end our business segment of it. And I just want to learn a little bit about your background, right? So obviously you have this spirit to change the industry. So, what's when you were a kid, what were you doing? How many, you have brothers and sisters? Because I always think it's funny to find out, you know, about people's family life growing up to what inspired you to become the leader you are today.
Yeah, so my childhood, very fortunate. I don't know if you've ever read A Boy's Life, um, but that was small town Indiana, cornfield as the backyard, playing basketball hoops in the front yard. Had two great parents and two younger brothers. It was absolutely really fortunate with that. Also really involved with my grandparents. I think that's probably where my engineering background came is. My grandfather he was a draftsman for Gulf Oil, worked night shift to basically allow to put his daughters into college. He was an incredibly naturally gifted engineering mind, but never went to college, so was always limited in terms of his opportunities for career progression, just as a draftsman. And so instilled that, hey, go to college and so you can maximize your opportunities. And that trickled down into what we were doing. And so it was always from the beginning, you're going to college and just had that natural curiosity for how things work and why things behave the way that they do, and which led itself into engineering. One of the things so for me personally, I also played soccer at a relatively high level, and one of the things I wanted to personally do was play Division I soccer. And so I knew I wanted to get an engineering degree, and I knew I wanted to play Division I soccer, and so looked all across the country, and the only entity that would let me do that was 20 minutes down the road at Butler. And so went to Butler. They have a program that works with Purdue engineering. So I was able to play soccer at Butler, get a general econ degree there, and then get my engineering degree from Purdue, while playing Division I soccer. And so that was a big portion of setting the foundation or skill set on how I was going to go about that. And then also during that time knew that, hey, I wanted to start something on my own, but knew I needed to expand my skill set from a sales standpoint, right? Like it's all right, I'm an engineer, I can fix things, I know how things work, but like I'm an engineer, so I don't necessarily like people, but I need to figure out how they will buy stuff from me if I'm going to be leading an organization. So joined up with ExxonMobil in a sales engineer role. So a good combination of those two worlds. And then once I got comfortable with that skill set, was like, okay, all right, ready to make the jump into entrepreneurism. Had tried a couple different things for one reason or another, just never really felt the conviction to go all in on them. And it was my wife and I were getting ready to have kids, and it was one of those things where, all right, if we have a kid, the thing like salary, healthcare, pension, like that stuff matters. And if I don't leave now, I'm not leaving for 25 years. So it's like we had to leave now, and it was like just jump off, pick something, and ended up looking at a variety of things, whether it was starting something from scratch, buying a small business and getting that financed through an SBA loan, or starting a franchise. And I ended up starting a CertaPro painters franchise, as in the intent of that was always to be the first business. And that's really what started everything um, with PaintJet, and just going through all of the small business stress, and the things that you have to do as a small business owner, where it's like, there was a point we didn't have, like we went through 2 years where we didn't have more than a couple weeks of cash in the bank. And then when you're just like, all right, there's this, and it's like it's your house is on the line. You lose your house, you're probably getting divorced. Like your family's, you have to do some tough things. You have to have some tough conversations. Like there are parts of it that it is not fun at all. Um, but these were all things that I was able to take with me and learn on my own dime, that now, as I'm responsible for other people's money, that makes me that much better as a business owner and entrepreneur. And I think the other thing too that I really learned throughout this process. And it wasn't just in the small business world, but then also going back in collegiate athletes, is the difference between world class and really good is not the worlds apart that we think. I mean, it's really on the margins. And sometimes the only difference is because you just didn't go all in. I mean, you can be really good at what you did. You just didn't go all in the way that a world class performer does. And understanding that the opportunity we have in front of us to go all in, because I haven't done that. There's been times when I specifically pass. It's like, hey, it's unlikely it will turn out this way. So maybe you don't go all in. And then you look back and it's like, shit, I should have. I was actually this close. I could have done it. And then going through a couple of things like that, I think that's been a major motivator in terms of going all in with what we're doing now at PaintJet.
I'm going to tell you what you just said. I almost gave, I don't know, something weird, but you almost made the hair on my neck stand up, because when you talked about the whole world class going all in thing, because I had somebody today tell me we're talking about what I'm doing. They're like, dude, you're almost manic, like calm down. And, I got off the phone. I was like, am I over the top with this? But you just re-inspired me to realize the difference is I'm all in and they're not. Right.
Well, and this really goes back to athletics, and so I played at a relatively high level. But this was also back in 2009, where it's like I had some opportunities to play after college, but it was also soccer too. So it's like $500 for a game check. If you win, you get an extra $100. You got 20 games, and then you're working summer camp. So it's like economically, it's really not the answer. But then I went. When I was with ExxonMobil, I got a chance to go over to Europe and catch a couple games over there. And this is the Premier League, and we're watching Arsenal and Man City. And it's like, I like going to the warm-ups just because that's where you see how good these people are. And you start watching them, and I'm just like, no, I'm not going to say I was better than them. And there's something that they can do I never could. But there are some components of my game where it's like, man, I could hang with these guys. And just knowing that the only difference was the commitment level of what I had before versus, and I think in a lot of ways, if we don't see what best in class looks like, we assume that the gap is just so much farther than what it actuality is. When in actuality, it's not this far away. It's like that far away.
I'll tell you what, sometimes somebody comes on my podcast and I literally am like, how do we just meet today on the podcast? Because we could probably literally be great friends. Hopefully, maybe one day we will be, because what you just said is like exactly football for me, right? Mm-hmm. I played football. No, I didn't even play in college. Believe it or not, I never went to college. I got married when I was 19, had an opportunity to play at Northwestern and, some other schools locally in Illinois. And I
want to clarify. You had an opportunity to play football at Northwestern, which is basically an Ivy League school, and said, no, yes, I don't want to do that.
But hold on now. This is a good story. And let me explain to anybody listening that's young, because sometimes the universe already has your destiny figured out, but you're young and dumb and you think you've got it. So I wanted to be a meteorologist my entire life. Tom Skilling, if you're from Indiana, Tom Skilling's WGN, he just is retiring now, but my dad took me to see him 4 times. I was set. I'm going to be a meteorologist. And the schools I needed to go to for that would have been Penn State, Northern. Those were the 2 schools I really wanted to go to, Oklahoma State. So I didn't get any looks from that. Now, where I did get was Millikan, Northwestern, Central Michigan, and they were all like business and law. Okay. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I'm not going to be a businessman, and I'm definitely not going to be a lawyer, because I hated school. So the difference is, you made a comment, I'm an engineer and I don't like people. If you notice, I smiled because I deal with a lot of engineers now in my space. I am the opposite. I love people. That's why I have a podcast. And all I did in high school was bullshit with everybody. Half of my homework got done by some girl that I installed a car stereo for. I mean, that's what's kind of screwed up about my successes. My success is always tied into attracting the best people. Like, I am a magnet for great people like that. I mean, that's what I'm blessed with. Even in school, because I was a magnet for people who would do my homework for me. And it's almost embarrassing to say it, but it is the honest truth. So And my sister Vicky, if she ever listens to this, is the primary person that would do it. But anyway, so now my point is I got really skinny. So as you see me right now, I'm 6'4", I'm 280. So you can't tell on the screen, I'm a big guy. And when my senior year of high school, I lost a ton of weight. I could run 2.5 miles in 15 minutes. I could bench press 320 pounds. I was skinny. So Northwestern's thing was you either have to become a tight end or you have to gain a lot of weight. Okay. And my mom and dad, my dad was a union laborer and my mom worked for the city of Elgin. Okay. Not a lot of means to pay. And at the time, that tuition, would have been $35,000 a year. Hey, I couldn't do what they wanted. So it's important to know it's not like they said, here's a full ride scholarship. They basically said, we want you to play here. You've been to our football camp 2 years now. We really like what we see. But you either need to have hands or you need to gain a lot of weight. Right.
So it was a walk on, potentially roll into a scholarship.
Exactly. So just to clarify for listeners, I didn't pass up a full ride scholarship now. But what you said resonates with me because now when I go to football games, and a lot of people assume because I played football, I watch football. I actually have trouble watching football because when I watch it, I realize I stopped because I was scared I couldn't catch the way they wanted me to or gain the weight. And what screwed up is I got married and ballooned up to 280 pounds without even trying. The next year, I went from 215 to 280. My ex-mother-in-law walked up and went, holy shit, you got fit the first time she saw me within a year, right? So anyway, the irony is, I own 5 businesses. The universe was already telling me they should go to school and get a business degree. So it's crazy. I mean, looking back on it, but when you brought up watching the soccer warm-ups, the only reason I said what I said is I go to football games and I'm like, I am just as big as these guys. And I watch what they're doing in warm-ups and like, I can do that. I did all of this. The only difference is I didn't push myself to be world class. So anyways, what you said was like, it just resonated with me to the point where that's why I went through that, but it's kind of crazy. So now you said, to get off this topic, you said that you painted a warehouse before you realized you needed this with your family. Was that with your brothers, with your wife, all of them? Like, who helped you do that?
You talk about some small business entrepreneurial scars. This was my brother, who was my original business partner. Then we realized that was really stupid decision if we wanted to stay like brothers. Let's say my mom and my dad, my wife, who was pregnant at the time, and then when we realized that she was painting doors with high VOC paints, realized that was really stupid.
I was gonna say she might have been double respirated,
Yeah, so we're like, okay, you're not doing that anymore. And then we didn't have any headlights, and customer deadline was like the next day. They had a bunch of VPs coming out. So we're painting this structure with like by iPhone light.
Oh my gosh.
And it was eventually like, okay, we're not going to get it done. So it's like, okay, what's the last portion of the wall? Like the last piece of the thing. So they're like, we come up that day, and that morning we're all in this back corner finishing it up as these VPs are walking into the parking lot and into the office. So after going through that, and obviously everyone had a great time and was not upset at all at me specifically for putting everyone in this terrible situation.
Yeah.
Very, very quickly realized that, okay, we don't want to be doing this anymore. Time to change.
So great story, by the way. So any kids, or well, you said your shoes.
Yes. It turned out we have a beautiful daughter that was my wife was pregnant with at the time. She's now 6 years old. Very healthy, no problems.
So fumes not affected. Yeah,
fumes are not affected. We're good there. And then we also last year were fortunate enough to adopt a little baby boy. So now it's those two. Our daughter just went in kindergarten. Our little baby boy, he takes up a lot of time. And it's myself, my wife, We still have a relationship with my family, my brother, and my parents as well. So it's definitely been a long journey, but it's definitely been worth it.
Fantastic. Yeah, I
Now,
own
I would say if you were going to tell me that's what I had to go to get here, I'd probably say maybe not. But I'm glad I went through it once. We're not going through that again.
yeah, that's awesome. Well, so I own all my businesses with my brother and now one with my daughter. So somehow I've been able to make
Congratulations.
that family dynamic thing work. But there's been some arguments my team probably hasn't loved because when you're brother to brother, you can't help but to go back to being in growing up in the same household and going back into
Are you the oldest,
I
youngest?
am the oldest. I'm the oldest. I'm the largest by far. Uh, by probably 80 pounds, So yeah, so there's always the when all the dust settles, I have that. So but honestly, we make a great team. I always call my brother the tether to my hot air balloon because
Mhm.
probably without him I'd be bankrupt. He is the like, hey, you should really rethink that. Do we really need more? Now as of late, it's been pretty awesome because he now has been saying stuff like, hey, I'm just 5 years behind you. Like it's been actually pretty cool looking at our relationship, because he's younger than me. So he'd always be like, why do you need that? And why do you need this? And I don't see why we're doing that. But now he's starting to see, okay, wait a minute. Every time I question what he does 5 years later, I'm like, yeah, we should have done that, you know?
Mhm.
And that's one thing that's interesting about an entrepreneurial journey, especially when you have partners, is if there's an age gap between the partners, the thing that I want is setting my retirement up.
Mhm.
And the things that he wants are just like, well, why do we need to do that right now? Even when we got key man policies, so
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a credit to you and your ability to handle that relationship. I was not able to handle that in the way that I should have. And ultimately, I think we've realized that it's just easier if I'm running it.
well, first of all, thanks for that. I love being in business with my brother. Uh, I say every day is like a family party, and every now and then you get an argument at family party. So let's be clear. But yeah, no, it's been good. I mean, like I said, it sounds like you're living a great life doing what you're doing. That's how I am too, and that's why I have the show is to bring incredible people like you on, let people hear about what you're doing. I think it's fantastic to hear that you saw a problem, you solved it, or you're in the process of solving it. I guess to round out the show, I'll just ask, like, what do you're obviously changing the space. So as
Mhm.
people start to know who you are and what you're doing, what do you want kind of the thing that the industry remembers you as? Like what, like to say, hey, what did he actually do to move the space forward?
Well, I mean, I say in a lot of ways it will be self-evident. In a lot of ways it just becomes, and this actually kind of gets to what you're talking about before is, hey, that's cool that we're going on the outside of buildings. Well, we did that because technically it's really hard. Um, there's a lot of challengers, but no one can really do anything outside. And so what I believe you're going to start seeing is that this ends up just being the way that these type of buildings are painted, and it will just, and I don't think you're gonna have to say anything. It's just gonna, you're just gonna see them on sites, and it'll just be, yeah. Remember when we used to get up in lifts and ladders up 60 feet tall and do this crazy stuff? And yeah, we don't do that anymore. And
It
it'll be our equipment that has enabled that.
it'll be like when people talk in the construction industry. Remember, we used to dig a trench without shoring. It'll be
Yeah,
like something like that. Yeah.
yeah. It'll be something that's like, it'll be so ubiquitous in just how it's done that it'll almost be forgotten.
Yeah. Oh, well, this was awesome. I really appreciate you being on the show. I hope you enjoyed the hour and 20 minutes as much as I did.
Yeah, I
Um,
had a lot of fun.
awesome. Everybody, thanks for tuning in and listening to this episode. I hope you loved it as much as I enjoyed producing it.